Mr. President, I rise today to join my colleagues in opposing the nomination of Senator Jeff Sessions to be Attorney General of the United States. Now more than ever, it is critical to have an Attorney General who is an independent defender of our Constitution, who puts the rule of law before all else, who is committed to ensuring that all Americans have equal access to justice. Unfortunately, Mr. President, I do not believe that Senator Sessions is fully committed to enacting those principles. And every American should be concerned that he will not independently stand up to President Trump. Senator Sessions was one of Trump's earliest supporters and has been a key source of influence for the president's actions. White House strategist Stephen Bannon recently wrote to the Washington Post, and I quote, "Throughout the campaign, Sessions has been the fiercest, most dedicated, and most loyal promoter in Congress of Trump's agenda, and has played a critical role as the clearinghouse for policy and philosophy to undergird the implementation of that agenda." In the wake of President Trump's first few weeks in office, in which he signed dozens of executive orders, including the un-American backdoor Muslim ban, it was reported that Senator Sessions played a role in influencing the president's policies and strategy. My office has heard from thousands in New Hampshire who have had serious, legitimate concerns about the president's actions in his first few weeks. And I am concerned by reports that Senator Sessions pushed for an even more aggressive approach. The Washington Post reported, again a quote, "The senator lobbied for a shock and awe period of executive action that would rattle Congress, impress Trump's base, and catch his critics unaware." Senator Sessions' record in Congress and his history of standing against the constitutionally protected rights of millions of Americans is deeply troubling. And these are issues that my office has heard from constituents across New Hampshire. As a resident from Merrimack wrote, quote, "Pick a current civil rights issue, and Sessions is on the wrong side of history." Mr. President, I do not have confidence that Senator Sessions would be an independent Attorney General who would put the rights of all Americans before the whims of this president. And that is why I oppose this nomination. Mr. President, I am incredibly proud that my home state of New Hampshire understands that the values of inclusion and equality are at the very core of what makes us American and at the core of our constitutional system. We believe in freedom and the value of every person. And that is our duty and our destiny, to extend the same freedoms we enjoy to all of our people. We value human rights, and we see inclusion and equality as core principles in our laws. And these values have helped our state become a leader in advancing the rights of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community, recognizing that all people deserve the legal right to fully participate in the social, civic, and economic life of our communities. Years ago, New Hampshire led the way in becoming one of the first states in the nation to pass marriage equality, and I took great pride in casting my vote for that legislation as a state senator. When we passed that legislation, we made clear once again that when we as a state or a country bring people in from the margins into the heart and soul of our democracy, we all get stronger. About a year after we took that step in New Hampshire to enact marriage equality, I was sitting on a plane in the window seat, and the man next to me noticed my name on the notebook I was reading and said, "Aren't you elected in New Hampshire? What do you do there?" And I told him I had been a state senator, and he looked at me and he said, "Did you have anything to do with marriage equality passing?" Now, I wasn't sure what this man's point of view was as I sat next to him on this plane ride. And I said, well, yes, I was in the New Hampshire Senate and I voted to support marriage equality. And he said, well, I want to thank you for it. I'm a recruiter for one of our state's largest employers, and marriage equality is the best recruitment tool we have. And I asked him to expand a little bit on that. And he said, it isn't that we have any particular percentage of LGBTQ applicants or employees that's unusual, but the fact that New Hampshire passed marriage equality signals to people we're trying to recruit that we are an open and inclusive state where everybody is welcome if they're willing to work hard and do their part to move us forward. During my time as governor, we continued to fight for progress for the LGBTQ community, including issuing an executive order to prohibit discrimination in our state government on the basis of gender identity or gender expression. Unfortunately, Mr. President, Senator Sessions' record and previous comments call into question whether he will enforce the federal laws designed to promote equality and protect the LGBTQ community. Senator Sessions has been a vocal opponent of marriage equality, going as far as to label same-sex marriages as dangerous. In 2004, he stated, quote, I do believe it is not disputable that adopting a same-sex marriage culture undermines and weakens marriage, close quote. Following the Supreme Court's 2015 decision that guaranteed marriage equality in all 50 states, Senator Sessions said, quote, the marriage case goes beyond what I consider to be the realm of reality, close quote. As Attorney General, it would be Senator Sessions' job to implement and defend this ruling. I'm extremely concerned that he would not follow through with that responsibility. Senator Sessions has also worked to undermine the federal hate crimes law designed to protect LGBTQ Americans. In explaining his vote against the 2009 Matthew Shepard and James L. Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act, Sessions argued that federal protections for LGBTQ Americans were not necessary. When debating the law, Sessions said, quote, I'm not sure women or people with different sexual orientations face that kind of discrimination, close quote. Following Senator Sessions' nomination as Attorney General, Judy Shepard, the mother of Matthew Shepard, for whom that law was named, wrote a letter for the Human Rights Campaign opposing Sessions' nomination. Shepard wrote, and I quote, 1998, my son Matthew was murdered because he was gay. A brutal hate crime that continues to resonate around the world even now. Following Matt's death, my husband Dennis and I worked for the next 11 years to garner support for the Federal Hate Crimes Prevention Act. We were fortunate to work alongside members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, who championed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act with the determination, compassion, and vision to match ours as the parents of a child targeted for simply wanting to be himself. She went on, Senator Jeff Sessions was not one of these members. In fact, Senator Sessions strongly opposed the hate crimes bill, characterizing hate crimes as mere thought crimes. She continued, quote, my son was not killed by thoughts or because his murderers said hateful things. My son was brutally beaten. My son with the butt of a .357 Magnum pistol. They tied him to a fence and left him to die in freezing temperatures because he was gay. Senator Sessions' repeated efforts to diminish the life-changing acts of violence covered by the Hate Crimes Prevention Act horrified me then as a parent who knows the true cost of hate. And it terrifies me today to see that this same person is now being nominated as the country's highest authority to represent justice and equal protection under the law for all Americans." Close quote. Mrs. Shepard went on, quote, "As Attorney General, Senator Sessions would be responsible for not only enforcing the Hate Crimes Prevention Act, but a myriad of other civil rights laws, including the Violence Against Women Act, which includes explicit protections for LGBTQ people. Senator Sessions' very public record of hostility towards the LGBTQ community and federal legislation designed to protect vulnerable Americans, including the Voting Rights Act, makes it nearly impossible to believe that he will vigorously enforce statutes and ideas that he worked so hard to defeat." Close quote. I agree with Judy Shepard, and it's clear that Senator Sessions' record shows that he will not stand up for the rights of LGBTQ Granite Staters and Americans if he becomes Attorney General. There are other issues of concern as well, Mr. President. I've always fought to protect a woman's constitutionally protected right to make her own health care decisions and control her own destiny, and I always will. Roe versus Wade is a landmark decision that protects women and their access to abortion. It guarantees a fundamental right for women. It affirms that a woman has the right to decide whether to continue or terminate a pregnancy without government interference. Sessions' record leaves questions on whether he will enforce the law in this area. During his time in the Senate, Sessions has been dedicated to opposing a woman's constitutional right to safe and legal abortion. He voted to grant legal status to an embryo. He has repeatedly voted to deny women in the military the right to use their own private funds for abortion care at military hospitals. He has said that he would like to see a woman's constitutional right to make her own health care decisions overturned. This is unacceptable for a nominee to lead the Department of Justice, whose role would be to uphold the very law that he seeks to overturn. We also know that a woman's right to make her own health decisions isn't just a matter of freedom, a matter of health. It's also a matter of economics, finances. When women have to pay more for their health care, it puts them at an economic disadvantage. As governor, I restored family planning funds and pushed to restore state funding to Planned Parenthood because I know how critical access to these services are for the women and families of my state. Planned Parenthood provides critical primary and preventive health care services to thousands of New Hampshire women, including preventive care, birth control, and cancer screenings. And there are countless stories of women whose lives have been changed as a result of access to Planned Parenthood in my state. A young woman named Alyssa in my state lost her health insurance. She was on her father's health insurance. She was younger than age 26. And then suddenly her father passed away. And then she had a medical emergency. She didn't know where to go. Grieving for her father, she was also without health insurance. She turned to Planned Parenthood, and they were able to provide her the care that she needed. Alyssa's story and the stories of thousands of others across our state make it clear why it is essential that we have an Attorney General who will protect a woman's constitutionally protected right to make her own health care decisions. Senator Sessions has voted 6 times to block patients from accessing health care at Planned Parenthood health centers. Senator Sessions has stated that Planned Parenthood should not receive federal funds for any services because, among the other health care services it provides the constitutionally protected care, abortion, that a woman needs when she decides she must terminate a pregnancy. And Senator Sessions has opposed women's access to no-cost birth control that is now provided through the Affordable Care Act. Sessions even refused to condemn President Trump's remarks in the Access Hollywood tapes released last year, saying that he did not characterize the behavior President Trump described as sexual assault. And he voted against the 2014 reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, which is critical for the investigation and prosecution of violent crimes against women. The Violence Against Women Act was signed into law by President Clinton in 1994 and has been reauthorized by bipartisan majorities in Congress in 2000 and 2005 and signed by President George W. Bush. The idea that the Attorney General of the United States would not support this common sense legislation to protect women from violence is unacceptable. As governor, I have also fought to expand economic opportunity for women and families. We passed the New Hampshire Paycheck Fairness Act in New Hampshire, making sure that an equal day's work gets an equal day's pay. I also strongly support efforts to expand paid family leave to ensure that workers are able to support their families during times of need at home. And I'm troubled that Senator Sessions has worked to roll back the progress of equal pay. Senator Sessions voted against the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act and has consistently voted against the Paycheck Fairness Act. I am far from the only one in New Hampshire who opposes the idea of Senator Sessions as our nation's top law enforcement officer. I've heard from many of my constituents regarding the impact of Senator Sessions' nomination on women's rights. As one constituent wrote, and I quote, "I truly fear for the future of women's rights and my daughter's right to an autonomous life if Jeff Sessions is confirmed." The bottom line, Senator Sessions has a record of undermining the civil and constitutional rights of women in this country. On another topic, in recent weeks there has been much discussion about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, otherwise known as IDEA, and the fact that Education Secretary Betsy DeVos seemed confused about the fact that IDEA is federal law and also declined to commit to enforcing it. This contributed to my vote against Mrs. DeVos's nomination yesterday. What is also appalling is Senator Sessions' previous comments on IDEA. In 2000, Sessions gave a speech on the Senate floor suggesting that disciplinary problems in schools stem from IDEA. Sessions said, quote, "Teachers I've been talking to have shared stories with me. I've been in 15 schools around Alabama this year. I've talked to them about a lot of subjects. I ask them about this subject in every school I go to, and I am told in every school that this is a major problem for them. In fact, it may be the single most irritating problem for teachers throughout America today." He continued, quote, "There's no telling how many instructional hours are lost by teachers in dealing with behavioral problems. In times of an increasingly competitive global society, it is no wonder American students fall short. Certain children are allowed to remain in the classroom, robbing the other children of hours that can never be replaced." The quote continues, "There is no need to extend the school day. There is no need to extend the school year. If politicians would just make it possible for educators to take back the time that is lost on a daily basis to certain individuals, there's no doubt we would have better educated students." And he added, quote, "It is clear that IDEA 97 not only undermines the educational process, it also undermines the authority of educators. In a time when our profession is being called upon to protect our children from increasingly dangerous sources, our credibility is being stripped from us." Close quote. Well, as I have discussed over the last couple of weeks. The passage of IDEA was a groundbreaking moment in American history for people who experience disabilities and their families. After IDEA was passed, all schools, all public schools in our country were required to provide a free and appropriate education for children with disabilities. And children like my son, now 28 years old and a graduate of Exeter High School, who used to be relegated to institutions, subjected to inhumane conditions and maltreatment, treated as truly less than human, were included in our public schools. There is not a parent of a child like my son who does not acknowledge that including new people with different needs in any setting can be challenging. But we are Americans and we are supposed to do challenging things. And that is what IDEA challenged us to do. I have seen the power of inclusion not only in my own home, in my community, in our schools. I have seen it strengthen other students. Just last week, one of my son's classmates from 5th grade reached out because he had seen the coverage of the hearing concerning Mrs. DeVos's nomination. He said in an email to me, "You know, I don't remember much about 5th grade, but I do remember having lunch with Ben. And I remember even now Ben's lighthearted disposition." What a lesson for our children to learn, that even if you have severe and debilitating physical disabilities that prevent you from speaking or typing or walking or eating in a typical way, you can be lighthearted and love your life. There are always challenges connected to including new students with different learning styles, different behaviors. But because of IDEA, we have learned how to help those students cope and learn and adjust their behavior. And for anybody to suggest that it is the fault of people with disabilities, that it is their disability that is undermining our education, is appalling. Various groups who represent individuals with disabilities have therefore voiced their opposition to Senator Sessions' nomination. The Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates has written to the Judiciary Committee arguing that Sessions, and this is a quote from their letter, has compiled a long-standing and consistent record, including public statements, policy proposals, and other various actions that serve to discriminate against the rights and dignity of children and adults with disabilities. Adding, quote, Sessions' disdain for special education and opposition to community integration of individuals with disabilities is at odds with the laws, inconsistent with our nation's commitment to supporting individuals with disabilities, and will lead to far higher societal costs in the future. And a constituent from Etna, New Hampshire, wrote to share her concerns on Senator Sessions' record on individuals with disabilities. She said, quote, Senator Sessions has a long, well-documented history of active opposition to respect for the human rights of the American citizenry, particularly those of us who experience multiple marginalizations in our society. And as such, he is unfit for the office of Attorney General. It is abundantly clear to me as a disabled woman that his Justice Department would not support my equal protection under the law. Americans with disabilities and their families deserve better than an Attorney General who has consistently spoken out against their rights. And Mr. President, I also have concerns about Senator Sessions' voting rights record. Voting is our most fundamental right, and ensuring that everyone can exercise that right is critical to making our democracy successful. Everyone deserves representation and the opportunity to vote on who represents them. Throughout his time in office, Senator Sessions has demonstrated an opposition to ensuring that all Americans have the right to vote. In 1986, Senator Sessions called the Voting Rights Act, quote, an intrusive piece of legislation. In 2006, after the Senate passed the Voting Rights Act reauthorization, Senator Sessions joined other Republicans in issuing a highly unusual committee report that sought to undermine the same legislation that they had all just voted to support. Chief Justice Roberts cited to the report in his Shelby County versus Holder opinion, which gutted a key provision of the Voting Rights Act. Senator Sessions celebrated the Shelby County decision and stated that it was, quote, good news for the South. Since that decision, and despite the passage of voting restrictions in several states by Republican legislatures, Sessions has said, quote, I don't think that the Supreme Court ruling has damaged voting rights in any real way, close quote. It's clear that Senator Sessions is not committed to protecting voting rights. Many Granite Staters have written to my office highlighting Senator Sessions' record on voting rights as a reason that the Senate should oppose his nomination. A constituent from Tilton, New Hampshire said, quote, our country has battled long and hard to throw off the errors of our past, but voting rights are under assault. Jeff Sessions is not the right person to safeguard the integrity of our voting process, nor can he be trusted to work on behalf of all Americans in the cause of justice. Mr. President, at a time when we are discussing ensuring equality, justice, and inclusion for all of our citizens, I'm reminded of my father's story. My father was born and raised in the segregated South. His father was a traveling shoe salesman, and his mother was a school teacher who, during the Depression, got paid in food stamps. That's what kept the family going. Through hard work, a scholarship, taking on jobs like waiting tables and moving furniture, and a bit of good luck, my dad was able to attend Princeton University. It wasn't long before his studies were interrupted, however, when, following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he left to volunteer to fight in World War II, eventually being thrown into the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge marked one of the first times in World War II that white and black American soldiers fought alongside each other. Thousands of miles away from the school where he had been studying, this young man from the Deep South found himself learning more about the values of equality and inclusion than he ever could have learned back at home. And after my father's experience in that battle, where African American soldiers fought and died alongside their white counterparts, Dad returned home to a life of working to make the notion that every single one of us counts a reality. Our founders believed in that principle, that when you count everyone and bring more people in from the margins, that we all grow stronger. We know that our founders didn't count everyone at first, but they had faith that we would continue striving, as our Constitution commands us to build a more perfect union. That generation after generation, we would continue to deliver on our nation's promise of equality. And while the road to greater inclusion is not without significant challenges, time and again, we have persevered to build a better future. We need leaders who are committed to those values and who are committed to enforcing the laws that have included more and more Americans. Senator Jeff Sessions' record shows that he is not committed to those values, and he has demonstrated that he lacks the independence needed to stand up to President Trump. For these reasons, I cannot support Senator Sessions to be the next Attorney General of the United States, and I urge my colleagues to vote no on this nomination. Thank you. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.